On a quiet autumn afternoon, an 80-year-old man sits peacefully in a cafe, savoring his usual cup of coffee. But when a group of arrogant young men walk in, their laughter and taunts shatter the calm. They see him as weak, an easy target for humiliation. What they don't know is that behind his quiet demeanor lies a past that will leave them speechless. A shocking truth is about to be revealed, one that will change their lives forever. The morning sun spilled over the terracotta rooftops of Lisbon's Alfama district, painting the narrow streets in hues of gold and amber. Tucked into a quiet corner near the Sé Cathedral stood Café Sol Nascente, a warm nook of weathered stone and wooden beams. Its windows glowed with soft light, the air inside rich with the aroma of espresso and pastéis de nata. At a table by the glass, Thomas Tom Walker sat alone, an 80-year-old black man with a face etched by decades, deep lines framing steady brown eyes, silver hair cropped short. His hands, though weathered, held his coffee cup with precision, his posture erect despite the years. Every morning, rain or shine, he'd been there, a fixture as reliable as the cathedral bells. That crisp October day, the cafe door creaked open, admitting a gust of cool air and a group of 5 young men, late teens to early 20s, loud and brash, their voices bouncing off the walls. They wore designer sneakers and smug grins, their Portuguese laced with the arrogance of privilege. To them, Alfama was their turf, a playground for their whims, and they strutted in like they owned it. Their eyes landed on Tom almost instantly, an old man, alone, black in a neighborhood they'd convinced themselves was theirs. He was an easy mark, a canvas for their cruelty. "Hey, Avo!" the leader, Miguel, called out, sauntering toward Tom's table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a smirk that screamed trouble. "What's an old guy like you doing here? Lost your way?" His crew snickered, spreading out like wolves circling prey. Tom didn't flinch. He lowered his cup slowly, his gaze lifting to meet Miguel's. "I'm where I belong," he said, his voice low and steady, accented with a faint trace of something foreign, British, maybe American. The group laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Where you belong," echoed Joao, a wiry kid with a buzz cut and a sneer. "What, the kitchen? Washing dishes?" They howled, feeding off each other's bravado. The cafe's other patrons, a few regulars, a tourist couple, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away. But no one intervened. Miguel leaned closer, resting a hand on the table. "You don't look like you fit here, Velho. Maybe you should go back where you came from." His tone was casual, but the threat lingered beneath it. Tom's lips twitched, a flicker of a smile, but he said nothing, just watched them. His silence unnerved them, though they wouldn't admit it. It only stoked their fire. They pressed in, their voices growing louder, their taunts sharper. "Bet he's never done a real day's work," said Pedro, a stocky kid with a chipped tooth. "Look at him, just sitting there like he owns the place," added Luis, the smallest, his eyes glinting with malice. The 5th, Andre, stayed quiet, hovering at the edge, his unease subtle but growing. He didn't laugh as hard, didn't lean in as close. Something about Tom, the stillness, the way his hands rested calmly, pricked at him, but he didn't speak up. Miguel slapped the table, the sound cracking through the room. "Stand up, old man. Let's see if you've got any guts." He grinned, expecting fear, weakness. Instead, Tom's eyes locked onto his, calm, unyielding, a depth in them that made Miguel's smirk falter for a heartbeat. He shook it off, stepping closer. What's wrong? Too frail to move? Tom tilted his head slightly. I don't need to stand to show you anything, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The tension spiked. Miguel's hand shot out, aiming to grab Tom's collar, but before he could touch him, a sharp voice rang out. Para! It was Mariana, the cafe's owner, a stout woman in her 60s with gray-streaked hair and a glare that could stop a storm. She barreled over, her apron dusted with flour, her presence a wall of fury. Back off, all of you, she snapped, planting herself between Tom and the group. You've no clue who you're messing with. Joao snorted, crossing his arms. What, this guy? He's nothing. Mariana's eyes narrowed. Nothing? That's Thomas Walker, 80 years old, retired military strategist, fought in wars you've only read about. Falklands, Gulf, peacekeeping missions. Trained elite soldiers, British SAS, Portuguese commandos. Hand-to-hand combat instructor too, could break you in half without blinking. And those medals he's got? More than your whole family's combined. The air froze. Miguel's hand dropped, his bravado crumbling like dry sand. The others stared, their laughter dying in their throats. Tom sat unchanged, sipping his coffee, but now they saw it. The discipline in his stillness, the strength coiled beneath his calm. This wasn't frailty. This was power, tempered and quiet. You're lucky he's patient, Mariana added, her voice a low growl. Now get out before I call the police, or let him deal with you. They stumbled back, shame and fear tangling in their faces. Miguel muttered something, a half-hearted sorry, but it drowned in the shuffle as they fled, the door slamming shut. The cafe exhaled, whispers rippling through the room. Tom just nodded at Mariana. Obrigado, he said simply, and returned to his coffee. The encounter stuck with them, a thorn they couldn't pull out. For weeks, the group avoided Alfama, their usual haunts feeling empty. Miguel, the loudest, felt it deepest, a mix of humiliation and something heavier, a nagging respect he couldn't shake. He'd grown up idolizing toughness, but Tom was different. Strength without noise, control without show. One sleepless night, staring at the ceiling, he made a choice. They had to go back, not to fight, but to face him. 2 months later, they returned to Café Sol Nascente, heads low, arrogance peeled away. Tom was there, same table, same coffee. They approached cautiously, Miguel clearing his throat. Senor Walker, he started, voice unsteady. We're sorry. For that day. We were stupid. Tom looked up, his gaze piercing but not harsh. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chairs. They obeyed, awkward and tense, the weight of their past hanging over them. We didn't know, Joao muttered, eyes on the table, who you are. You didn't ask, Tom replied, his words a mirror to their shame. You saw an old black man and wrote a story. Happens too often. Here. Everywhere. They nodded, chastened. Then Miguel leaned forward. Can you tell us about what you did? We want to understand. Tom studied them, then set his cup down. All right, he said. But you listen. Really listen. Over the next hour he spoke, voice steady, words deliberate. He told them of jungles in Angola, deserts in Iraq, nights planning ops under fire. He described training men to survive, outsmarting enemies with strategy, not brute force. He spoke of discipline, how it held him together when bullets flew, and respect, earned through deeds, not words. They hung on every syllable, the cafe fading around them. When he paused, Andre, the quiet one, spoke up. How do you stay calm after all that? Tom tapped his chest, then his temple. Strength isn't loud. It's here. You control that. You control everything. They left that day changed, not redeemed, not yet, but cracked open. Over months they returned, not as bullies but as learners. Tom shared more. Stories of resilience, lessons from the battlefield, quiet challenges to rethink their lives. They grew. Miguel started coaching kids' soccer. João volunteered at a shelter. Pedro and Luis tutored dropouts. Andre, the thinker, began writing about Alfama's untold stories. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. One spring morning in 2025, they sat with Tom again, the sun streaming through the window. You didn't have to help us, Miguel said. Why'd you bother? Tom smiled faintly, his eyes crinkling. Because you came back. That's where it starts. Where you go next. That's yours to figure out. They nodded, his words sinking deep. Tom's past had humbled them. His wisdom reshaped them. But their path wasn't finished. Neither was his. In Lisbon, in a world still shadowed by bias, the story hung open, real, hopeful, and beautifully unresolved.